I watched from the balcony of the Grand Celestial Hotel's Diamond Ballroom as my mother's face went sheet white, her hand frozen mid-reach toward the golden doors. Security had just turned her away. Again. "Ma'am, your name isn't on the list," the guard said, not unkindly but firmly. "This is a private event for Miss Chen and her family." "I am her family," Mom shrieked, her designer handbag, the one she'd bought with money meant for my college fund, trembling in her grip. "I'm her mother." Behind her, Dad stood rigid in his expensive suit, the very picture of wounded dignity. My sister Melissa clutched his arm, her perfectly made-up face crumbling with humiliation as other guests, the cream of our city's society, whispered and stared. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We have explicit instructions. You're not on the approved list." I sipped my champagne and smiled. Let them feel it. Let them understand what it meant to be excluded, unwanted, invisible, just like they'd made me feel for 16 years. Well, 32 years, if you counted my first life. The memory of my first death still haunted me sometimes. The cold hospital room, the beeping machines, the way my family hadn't even bothered to visit in those final days. I died at 32, alone and broke, destroyed by the very people who should have protected me. My parents had drained my trust fund, stolen my inheritance from my grandmother, and gaslit me into believing I deserved nothing. But the universe had given me a gift, a second chance. I'd woken up on my 6th birthday, small and weak in my childhood bed, with every memory of my previous life intact. The knowledge of every betrayal, every theft, every calculated cruelty burned in my mind like a brand. I knew exactly what they'd do to me if I let them. I knew how my sister would steal my designs and launch a fashion empire on my ideas. I knew how my parents would forge my signature to access my trust fund. I knew how they'd convince everyone I was mentally unstable when I tried to fight back, but this time, I had something they couldn't predict: foreknowledge. And I'd spent 10 years carefully, methodically destroying them. The first 6 years after my rebirth, I'd played the role of the overlooked daughter perfectly. I'd let them ignore me, let them shower Melissa with everything while I received scraps. I'd watched my mother coo over Melissa's mediocre drawings while tossing my advanced mathematics homework in the trash. I'd endured my father's cold dismissal when I'd won the regional science fair, while he threw a party for Melissa's participation trophy in a beauty pageant. I'd documented everything. Every time Dad borrowed from my trust fund, I'd taken photos of the withdrawal slips he'd carelessly left around. Every time Mom bought Melissa gifts with my grandmother's inheritance money, I'd kept receipts I'd dug out of trash cans. Every nasty comment, every forgotten birthday, every time they'd left me home alone. While taking Melissa on vacation, I'd written it down in a diary I'd kept hidden in a loose floorboard under my bed. At 12, I'd made my first move. I'd used my old life's knowledge of cryptocurrency to invest the small allowance my grandmother had secretly been sending me. $20 here, $50 there. I'd turned it into $20,000 by the time I was 14. By 15, I'd made my first million. My parents never knew. They never bothered to learn about my life. At 14, I'd contacted my grandmother's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, a shark in a suit who'd felt guilty about failing to protect my inheritance the first time around, though he didn't remember it. I'd told him I had concerns about my trust fund, about irregularities I'd noticed. He'd been skeptical at first, condescending even, until I'd shown him my documentation. Photos of withdrawal slips, dates and amounts, forged signatures. His face had gone from pink to red to purple. "Miss Chen," he'd said carefully, "these are serious allegations. If what you're showing me is true, your parents have committed serious financial crimes." "I know," I'd replied calmly. "I know, but I don't want to move on it yet. I want to wait. I want more evidence. I want them to feel so secure that they never see it coming." He'd looked at me like I was something both frightening and magnificent. "How old are you again?" 14. "But I'm very patient, Mr. Harrison, and I want justice, not just revenge." He'd agreed to monitor the situation, to build an airtight case. In the meantime, I'd worked on the other aspects of my plan. At 15, I'd reached out to my estranged paternal grandfather, a man my parents had convinced everyone was a bitter, cruel tyrant who'd cut them off without reason. In my first life, I'd never known the truth. In this life, I'd learned it early. My parents had stolen from him too, had forged business documents, had tried to siphon money from his company. He'd cut them off to protect himself. When I'd appeared at his office, having scheduled an appointment under a false name, He'd nearly had me thrown out until I'd said the words, "Grandfather, I know what they did to you, and they're doing the same thing to me." He'd frozen, stared at me with my father's eyes and a weathered face. "Tell me everything," he'd said. I had. I'd showed him everything. And I'd watched this proud, powerful man cry for the granddaughter he'd never been allowed to know. "I should have fought harder for you," he'd said. "I knew what they were, but I thought maybe with a child they'd change." "They didn't," I'd said simply. "But I'm not asking you to fight for me, grandfather. I'm asking you to teach me to fight for myself." And he had. He'd introduced me to his world, the world of real power and real money. He'd taught me about business, about leverage, about the art of the strategic takedown. He'd shown me that revenge was best served not hot or cold, but calculated to the exact temperature that would burn the most. Most importantly, he'd helped me secure what was left of my trust fund, transferring it to accounts my parents couldn't access. The amounts they'd already stolen, nearly $300,000, we'd left alone. Let them think they'd gotten away with it. Let them keep stealing. The bigger the crime, the harder the fall. At 16, 6 months before my sweet 16, I'd made the final preparations. I'd launched my first business, a tech startup that had gone viral within weeks, bought out by a major corporation for $8 million, all done under a shell company with my identity protected. My parents never knew. I'd used that money to buy property, to invest, to build an empire they couldn't see. And then I'd started planning the party that would change everything. My sweet 16 wasn't going to be sweet for everyone. The memory of planning it brought a smile to my lips even now, as I watched my mother being escorted away from the ballroom entrance by security. She was screaming now, causing a scene, which was perfect. Every phone in the vicinity was recording. By tomorrow, the video would be everywhere. 3 months before my 16th birthday, I'd sat down with my parents at dinner, a rare occasion when they'd remembered I existed, mostly because they wanted to ask me to babysit Melissa while they went to a gala. "Actually," I'd said sweetly, "I wanted to talk to you about my sweet 16. My mother had barely looked up from her phone. "What about it?" "I want to have a party, a real one." Melissa had snorted. "You? A party? Who would even come?" I'd smiled at her. Sweet, innocent Melissa, who'd been trained by our parents to see me as less than human. "I've made some friends through my school's robotics club. I thought it would be nice." "A robotics club party?" Dad had said, his voice dripping with disdain. "That sounds big educational." He'd said it like it was a dirty word. "We can't afford a big party," Mom had added quickly. "Money's tight." Money's tight. The eternal lie. They just spent $40,000 on Melissa's 15th birthday party. A Sweet 15 themed like a debutante ball, complete with a live band and a designer dress. "I know," I'd said. "That's why I was thinking of something small, maybe just a dinner. You could choose the restaurant." The relief on their faces had been palpable. Something cheap they could half-ass while focusing on Melissa. "That sounds reasonable," Dad had said. "We can do that." "Great," I'd said. "It's on June 15th. I'll send you the details." What I hadn't told them was that June 15th was a decoy date. My real party was on June 8th, a week earlier. The Grand Celestial Hotel. 500 guests. An orchestra, a fireworks display, the social event of the year, and their names weren't on the list. I'd sent out invitations to everyone who mattered in our city, business, leaders, socialites, politicians, celebrities. I'd invited my entire school, every teacher, every administrator. I'd invited my parents' friends, their business associates, everyone in their social circle. The invitations had been works of art, gold embossed, hand-delivered by courier, each one personalized. They'd promised an evening of elegance and surprise, hosted by Miss Arya Chen and her esteemed grandfather, Mr. Chen Wei. My grandfather's name on the invitation had ensured that everyone who received one would attend. Chen Wei was a legend in our city, a reclusive billionaire who rarely appeared at social events. An invitation from him was like a summons from royalty. But my parents hadn't received an invitation. I'd made sure of that. Instead, I'd sent them a separate invitation for a small family dinner on June 15th, at a mid-range restaurant across town. They'd RSVP'd immediately, probably relieved they'd only have to spend a few $100s on me. For the real party, I'd invited my mother's sister, my Aunt Wei, who'd always been kind to me in my first life before my parents had poisoned her against me. In this life, I'd maintained a secret relationship with her, meeting her for coffee once a month, carefully revealing the truth about my parents' treatment of me. She'd been horrified, then furious, then determined to help. I'd invited my father's brother, Uncle James, a man my parents had swindled out of a business opportunity years ago. I'd tracked him down, told him everything, and watched his face harden with recognition. He'd known what they were. He'd just never had proof. Now he did. I'd invited my maternal grandmother, my mother's mother, who'd tried to maintain a relationship with me despite my parents' interference. She'd cried when she'd received her invitation, called me immediately. "Aria," she'd sobbed, "sweetheart, are you sure? Your mother will be furious." "I know, Grandma," I'd said. "That's the point." I'd explained everything. She'd listened in growing horror, then steel had entered her voice. "I'll be there," she'd said, "and I'm bringing your grandfather's lawyers. If half of what you're telling me is true—" "It's all true," I'd promised, "and I have proof." The week before the party, I'd made my final moves. I'd contacted a journalist I'd known in my first life, a woman who'd later become famous for her investigative work on family financial abuse. In this timeline, she was still establishing herself, hungry for a big story. I'd given her everything, every document, every photo, every receipt. The story of how my parents had systematically stolen from me, from my grandfather, from anyone they could. How they'd forged documents, lied to lawyers, manipulated accounts. "This is," she'd breathed, flipping through the evidence. "This is massive. When do you want me to run it?" "The morning of June 9th, I'd said. "Give them one day to enjoy my party before the world knows what they are." She'd smiled. "You're terrifying. I like you." The night before the party, I'd barely slept. Not from nerves, I'd lived this moment in my mind 1,000 times, but from anticipation. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I'd take back everything they'd stolen and more. I'd chosen my dress carefully. A custom creation in midnight blue, elegant and sophisticated, designed to make me look older than 16. Not a little girl anymore. Not someone they could dismiss or overlook. When I'd arrived at the hotel at noon, 8 hours before the party, my grandfather had been waiting. He'd looked at me with pride and something like sadness. "Are you certain about this?" he'd asked. "Once you do this, there's no going back. They'll never forgive you." "They never loved me in the first place," but I'd said simply. "You can't lose what you never had, but you can take back what was stolen." He'd nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure everyone sees who you really are. Not their shadow. Not their victim. You." The party had started at 8 p.m. By 7, the hotel's entrance had been lined with luxury cars. Photographers had gathered, tipped off by my publicity team, yes, I had one, that something major was happening. The guest list had leaked strategically. Chen Wei's first social appearance in 5 years, plus every major name in the city, all for a mysterious 16-year-old's birthday. The speculation had been delicious. At 7:30, my parents had called. "Aria," my mother's voice had been tight with forced casualness. "We're hearing some strange things. People are saying there's a huge party at the Grand Celestial tonight for a Chen family member." I'd said, putting the finishing touches on my makeup. "Is that... Did your grandfather throw a party?" "He co-hosted, yes." Silence, then. "Why didn't you tell us?" "We would have come." "Would you?" I'd asked innocently. "You said money was tight. I didn't want you to feel obligated to buy me an expensive gift or anything." "We're your parents. Of course we should be there." "Oh, but you will be there. On the 15th, remember? Our little family dinner?" More silence. I could practically hear the gears turning, the panic rising. "Aria, My father's voice had cut in. He'd grabbed the phone. This isn't funny. We need to be at this party. Our friends are going. Our business associates. It looks very bad if we're not there. Does it? I'd mused. I suppose it might. People might wonder why a girl's parents wouldn't come to her birthday party. Exactly, so they might think you didn't know about it. Or worse, that you weren't invited. The sharp intake of breath had been satisfying. You didn't, Mom had whispered. You wouldn't. I'll see you on the 15th, I'd said cheerfully. At Olive Garden, 7 p.m. Don't be late. I'd hung up and blocked their numbers. At 7:55, I'd stood in the hotel's bridal suite, repurposed for the birthday girl, and looked at myself in the mirror. The girl looking back at me was a stranger to my parents. Confident, beautiful, powerful. At 8 p.m. exactly, my grandfather had knocked on the door. Ready? He'd asked. I've been ready for 10 years, I'd replied. The grand staircase of the ballroom had been designed for entrances like this. As the orchestra played, I'd descended, my hand on my grandfather's arm, and watched 500 faces turn toward me. The room had gone silent. Then someone had started clapping, then another. Then the entire ballroom had erupted in applause. I'd seen my Aunt Wei crying, my Uncle James beaming with fierce pride, my maternal grandmother dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. I'd seen my parents' friends, their business associates, all the people who'd dismissed me or ignored me at my parents' instruction, staring in shock. And I'd seen my parents' absence like a hole in the universe. The party had been magnificent. I'd given a speech thanking my grandfather for believing in me, for teaching me that family was about love and support, not obligation and control. I'd thanked my real family, the people in this room who'd chosen to see me, to value me. I hadn't mentioned my parents by name. I hadn't had to. Their absence spoke louder than any accusation. People had whispered, speculated. Where were my parents? Why weren't they here? What kind of parents missed their daughter's sweet 16? The kind who'd never valued her in the first place, the whispers had concluded. And then, at 9:30, they'd arrived. I'd been dancing with my grandfather when the commotion had started at the entrance. Security had been trying to quietly remove two people who were insisting they belonged there. Let them in, I'd told my grandfather softly. He'd frowned. Are you sure? I want everyone to see. He'd nodded and signaled security. They'd allowed my parents to approach, but not enter, the ballroom. I'd excused myself from the dance and walked toward them, aware that every eye in the room was on us. My mother had looked frantic, her hair disheveled from arguing with security. My father's face was red with humiliation and rage. Melissa stood behind them, her expression caught between confusion and dawning horror. Aria, Mom had started, her voice shaking. Sweetheart, there's been a terrible mistake. We didn't receive our invitations. There was no mistake, I'd said clearly, my voice projecting in the suddenly quiet ballroom. But we're your parents. Are you? I'd asked. Because parents protect their children. They love them. They support them. What have you done for me? My father's face had gone from red to purple. How dare you embarrass us like this? Embarrass you? I'd laughed and it had echoed. How many birthdays did you forget? How many times did you leave me home alone while you took Melissa on vacation? How many times did you tell me I was worthless? That I'd never amount to anything? Melissa had made a small sound. She'd looked genuinely shocked. Good. Maybe some part of her hadn't realized what they were doing. Or maybe she'd just never cared enough to think about it. We gave you a home, Mom had hissed. We fed you, clothed you, with money you stole from me, I'd said flatly. From my trust fund, from my grandmother's inheritance. Should we talk about that, here, in front of everyone? The color had drained from both their faces. I don't know what you think you know, Dad had started, but his voice had been weak. I know everything, I'd said. I have bank statements, withdrawal slips, forged signatures. Every dollar you've stolen from me, documented and verified by 3 different law firms. My mother had swayed on her feet. Behind me, I'd heard gasps, whispers intensifying. You're confused, she'd tried. You don't understand how these things work. I understand that you stole $347,000 from my trust fund over the past 10 years. I'd said calmly. I understand that you forged my signature dozens of times. I understand that you spent my inheritance on Melissa's clothes, her parties, her cars, and I understand that it's all illegal. Aria, my father had reached for me. I'd stepped back. Don't touch me. You're not welcome here. You're not welcome at any event I host ever again. And come Monday morning, you're going to understand exactly what you've done. What does that mean? Melissa had asked, her voice small. I'd looked at her, this sister who'd been turned into a monster by our parents' favoritism. Part of me pitied her, but only part. It means, I'd said, that the article detailing everything our parents have done will be published tomorrow. It means the police will be investigating. It means that everyone in this room now knows what kind of people you are. You vindictive little bitch, my mother had spat, her mask finally cracking completely. After everything we've done for you, security, I'd said calmly, please escort them out. They're trespassing. And I'd turned my back on them. The applause that had followed had been deafening. I'd walked back into the ballroom, back to my grandfather, and I'd danced. Behind me, I'd heard my parents screaming, heard security removing them, heard the cameras clicking as photographers captured their humiliation. And I'd smiled. The rest of the party had been perfect. People had approached me all night, had introduced themselves, had offered opportunities and connections. Business leaders had been impressed by my composure. Socialites had admired my courage. My parents' former friends had apologized for their complicity in overlooking the abuse. At midnight, there had been fireworks. I'd stood on the balcony watching them explode across the sky and felt something I hadn't felt in either of my lives. Free. The morning after the party, the article had hit. Local teen exposes parents' decade of financial abuse had been the headline, spread across the front page of the city's major newspaper and trending on every social media platform. The journalist had done her job beautifully. She'd laid out every detail, every theft, every forgery. She'd included photos of documents, quotes from lawyers, testimony from my grandfather about his own experiences with my parents' fraud. The public reaction had been swift and brutal. My parents had been fired from their jobs by noon. Their social media accounts had been deluged with hate. A criminal investigation had been opened. The bank had frozen their accounts pending the investigation. And the invitations had stopped coming. No more charity galas, no more country club events, no more business dinners or society parties. Everyone in our city knew what they were now, thieves who'd stolen from their own child. They were pariahs. Melissa's life had imploded too. Her friends, the shallow, wealthy kids who'd only liked her for her parties and gifts, had abandoned her overnight. The designer clothes, the expensive car, the lavish lifestyle, all bought with stolen money. Everyone knew. Her social media had been bombarded with comments calling her complicit, calling her a beneficiary of abuse. She'd tried to text me, called from her friends' phones when I'd blocked her, left tearful voicemails claiming she hadn't known, that she was sorry, that she just wanted her parents' love. I'd listened to exactly one voicemail before deleting her number entirely. I didn't know. She'd sobbed. Aria, please, I didn't know what they were doing. I thought they loved me more. I didn't know they were stealing from you to pay for my stuff. Please, you have to believe me. You're my sister. But I wasn't. Not really. She'd made that clear for 16 years, and every sneer, every dismissive comment, every time she'd stood by while our parents abused me. Ignorance wasn't innocence. It was just cowardice with better PR. The legal proceedings had moved faster than I'd expected. With my documentation, there wasn't much my parents could contest. They'd tried, of course. They'd hired lawyers, claimed I was mentally unstable, suggested I'd forge the documents myself. But their lawyers had been cheap. They couldn't afford better, not with their accounts frozen. And my lawyers, provided by my grandfather, had been sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. By August, they'd been charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and child financial abuse. The trial had been scheduled for October. By September, they'd tried to make a deal. They'd plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for my agreement not to pursue civil damages. I'd declined. I'd wanted the trial. I'd wanted every detail exposed in open court. I'd wanted the world to see exactly what they were. The trial had lasted 2 weeks. I'd testified for 3 days, had walked the jury. through every document, every lie, every theft. I'd been calm, composed, factual. I'd cried only once, when my lawyer had asked me how it had felt to know my own parents valued me so little. It felt like dying, I'd said quietly. Every day, a little bit more, until I couldn't remember what it felt like to be alive. The jury had deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. My father had gotten 7 years in federal prison. My mother had gotten 5. They'd been ordered to pay restitution, not just the money they'd stolen from me, but additional damages for emotional harm. The total had come to over $2 million when interest and penalties were calculated. They'd never be able to pay it. They'd declared bankruptcy within a month of sentencing. Their house, the house I'd grown up in, had been seized and auctioned. Their cars, their clothes, everything of value had been liquidated. Melissa had been forced to drop out of her private school. She'd moved in with my mother's sister, my Aunt Wei, who'd taken pity on her. She'd enrolled in public school, had gotten a part-time job at a coffee shop, had started therapy. I'd heard she was doing better, that she was finally becoming her own person, free from our parents' toxic influence. Part of me hoped that was true. Part of me didn't care. She'd made her choices, just like I'd made mine. Now, 6 months after the trial, I stood at my high school graduation, valedictorian, full scholarship to MIT already secured. My grandfather sat in the front row, beaming with pride. My grandmother, my aunt and uncle, all my real family sat with him. In the back, partially hidden, I spotted Melissa. She'd come. She'd wanted to see this, to see me succeed despite everything. I gave my speech about resilience, about becoming more than your circumstances, about choosing your own family. I didn't mention my parents by name. I didn't have to. Everyone knew my story. I was famous now. The girl who'd exposed her abusive parents, who'd taken back her power. I'd been on talk shows, featured in magazines, offered book deals. I'd become more than they'd ever dreamed I'd be. After the ceremony, Melissa approached me hesitantly. "Arya," she said softly, "congratulations. Your speech was beautiful." "Thank you," I replied, not unkindly but not warmly either. "I'm proud of you," she said, and tears welled in her eyes. "I know I have no right to say that. I know I was terrible to you, but I want you to know I'm in therapy. I'm trying to understand what happened, why I let them turn me into that. And I'm sorry. I know you'll probably never forgive me, and you shouldn't. But I'm sorry." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She looked different, thinner, paler, but somehow more real. The glossy veneer of spoiled princess had been stripped away, revealing someone almost human underneath. "I don't forgive you," I said honestly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever, but I hope you figure yourself out. I hope you become someone better than who they made you." She nodded, tears spilling over. "That's more than I deserve." "Thank you." She turned to walk away, but I stopped her. "Melissa." She looked back. "For what it's worth," I said, "they destroyed you too, just differently. They made you think love was conditional, that you had to be perfect to matter. That's its own kind of abuse. I hope you heal from it." Her face crumpled and she walked away quickly, shoulders shaking with suds. I watched her go and felt nothing, not satisfaction, not pity, not anger, just a strange emptiness where rage had lived for so long. "That was kind of you," my grandfather said, appearing at my elbow. "More kind than she deserved." "Maybe," I agreed, but I'm not doing it for her, I'm doing it for me. I'm tired of carrying hate around. It's exhausting." He squeezed my shoulder. "When did you become so wise?" "Somewhere between death and rebirth," I said lightly. Then froze. I'd never told him about that part, about my first life. But he just smiled. Life has a way of teaching us things, doesn't it? Sometimes, multiple times, until we get the lesson right. I stared at him. Did he know? Did he somehow understand? He just winked and walked toward the car. Come on, your grandmother wants to take you to dinner. She's been bragging about her brilliant granddaughter to everyone at her bridge club. I followed him, letting the question go unanswered. Some mysteries didn't need solving. That summer, before MIT, I traveled. Paris, Tokyo, Rome, all the places I'd never gotten to see in my first life. My grandfather had insisted, had said I'd earned a break from being strong all the time. In Paris, eating croissants at a cafe, I'd received a message from my lawyer. My parents were up for parole review. They'd served 18 months and were trying to get early release for good behavior. "What do you want me to do?" he'd asked. I'd thought about it for a long time. Thought about the girl I'd been in my first life. Broken, defeated, destroyed by these same people. Thought about the woman I was now. Strong, successful, free. "Nothing," I'd said finally. "Let the system do its job. I'm done letting them take up space in my head." "Are you sure?" "You have the right to submit a victim impact statement." "I know," I'd interrupted, but I don't need to. They're not important anymore. They're just people who used to be in my life, that's all." There'd been a pause, then "You've grown up a lot this year." "I've been growing up for 32 years, I'd said. It's about time it showed. I'd hung up and ordered another croissant. My parents had gotten parole. They'd been released after 2 years, burdened with debt, criminal records, and the eternal stain of their crimes. They'd moved to another city, changed their names, tried to start over. I'd heard through the grapevine, my Aunt Wei, who still kept tabs on them, that they'd gotten jobs as retail workers, that they lived in a small apartment, that they fought constantly, each blaming the other for their fall, that they asked about me sometimes, wondered how I was doing, wondered if I'd ever forgive them. I never reached out. At MIT, I'd thrived. My childhood interest in mathematics and science, suppressed and dismissed by my parents, had been allowed to flourish. I'd published papers, won awards, been recruited by top companies before I'd even graduated. By 21, I'd started my own tech company. By 25, it had gone public, making me a multimillionaire in my own right. Money I'd earned, not inherited, not stolen. I'd bought a penthouse in the city where I'd grown up, not to rub it in anyone's face, but because I'd wanted to prove to myself that the past didn't own me. I could go back and be happy there. On my 26th birthday, I'd thrown another party. Not as large as my sweet 16, but elegant, intimate. Close friends, trusted colleagues, my real family. No one I hadn't explicitly invited. The invitations had been specific. "Miss Arya Chen requests the pleasure of your company." No plus ones, no exceptions. I'd heard later that my mother had tried to come, had shown up at the building dressed in her best clothes, secondhand now but clean and respectable. The doorman had turned her away. She'd left a gift, a small jewelry box. Inside had been a necklace, cheap but carefully chosen, and a note. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," it had read in my mother's handwriting. "I know I can never undo what I did. But I want you to know that I see you now. I see how extraordinary you are. And I'm sorry I was too blind and selfish to see it before. I don't expect you to respond to this. I just needed you to know. I'm proud of you, even though I have no right to be." I'd held that note for a long time, sat with the feelings it brought up, anger, sadness, a strange, unwanted pity. But not forgiveness. Maybe someday, maybe never. I'd put the necklace and note in a box and put the box in a drawer, not thrown away, but not displayed either. Just there, acknowledged and set aside. Because that's what they were now, acknowledged and set aside. They weren't the center of my story anymore. They were just a chapter I'd survived. My life went on, brilliantly, successfully, joyfully. I dated, fell in love, had my heart broken and healed. I built my company into an empire. I used my wealth to fund scholarships for kids from abusive homes, to support organizations, us fighting family financial fraud. I turned my pain into purpose. I turned my trauma into triumph. And I never, ever invited them back into my life. Years later, I was 31 now, almost the age I'd been when I died in my first life. I was giving a keynote speech at a conference on family financial abuse. The room was packed with survivors, advocates, lawyers, social workers. And in the back, I saw them. My parents, older now, grayer, smaller somehow. They sat in the last row, partially hidden, just listening. I could have had them removed, could have made a scene, could have used my moment to publicly excoriate them one more time. Instead, I gave my speech, talked about patterns of abuse, about how family financial fraud was grossly underreported, under-prosecuted, about how children deserved protection, deserved advocates who believed them. I told my story, factually, clinically, without excessive emotion. The story of a girl who'd been abused and neglected, who'd found the courage to fight back, who'd built a life beyond her trauma. I never mentioned them by name. At the end, during the Q&A, someone asked, "Do you ever regret exposing your parents? Do you ever wish you'd handled it privately?" I'd thought about it, really thought about it. No, I'd said finally, because staying silent would have protected them at my expense. It would have prioritized their comfort over my healing, and I'd spent enough of my life making myself small so they could feel big. I don't regret claiming my truth. The applause had been thunderous. After the speech, I'd been surrounded by people wanting to talk, to share their stories, to thank me. When I'd finally gotten free, I'd looked for my parents. They were gone. But on my chair, where I'd left my bag, there was an envelope. Inside, a letter. "Dear Arya," it began. "We came today because we needed to see who you've become. We needed to witness with our own eyes the extraordinary woman you are despite us, not because of us. We know we have no right to be proud. We know we destroyed any claim we had to your life. But we want you to know that we are in therapy, separately and together. We are trying to understand what we did, why we did it, how we became people who could hurt their own child so profoundly. We are trying to become better, even though we know it's too late to matter to you. We don't expect forgiveness. We don't expect reconciliation. We just need you to know that you were right about everything, and we're sorry. We will be sorry for the rest of our lives. We hope someday that will mean something, even if it's not enough. We hope you are happy. We hope you are loved. We hope you have everything we failed to give you. With regret and sorrow, your parents." I'd read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in my bag. I didn't throw it away. I didn't frame it. I didn't respond. I just acknowledged it and moved on. Because that's what healing looked like for me, not a grand moment of forgiveness, not a tearful reunion, just acknowledgement and release. They'd hurt me. They were sorry. I was moving forward anyway. All of those things were true. All of them could coexist. That night, I'd gone home to my penthouse, poured myself a glass of wine, and stood on my balcony looking out at the same city where I'd died alone and broke in my first life, the same city where I'd been reborn and given a second chance. The same city where I'd destroyed my abusers and built an empire from the ashes. My phone had rung. My boyfriend, kind, supportive, nothing like the toxic men I'd wasted time on in my first life, asking if I wanted company. "Yes," I'd said, I'd like that." He'd arrived with Thai food and a terrible comedy movie, had made me laugh until my sides hurt, had held me when the laughter had turned into unexpected tears. "You okay?" he'd asked gently. "Yeah," I'd said, I saw my parents today. They wrote me a letter." "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not really," I'd admitted. "I just want to be here. With you, in this moment. Living my life." He'd kissed my forehead. "Then that's what we'll do." And we had. Because that was my revenge, ultimately. Not the trial, not the public humiliation, not their imprisonment or bankruptcy. My revenge was living well, was being happy, was building a life so full of love and success and joy that their absence from it didn't leave a hole. My revenge was being more than they'd ever dreamed I'd be. My revenge was thriving. Now, at 31, almost 32, I sometimes thought about the girl I'd been in my first life. The broken, defeated woman who died alone, convinced she was worthless because that's what her family had taught her to believe. I wished I could tell her it got better. I wished I could tell her she was stronger than she knew, but in a way, I had told her. I'd lived the life she'd deserved. I'd become the woman she'd never gotten the chance to be. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. My sweet 16 had been a declaration of war, but my life, this beautiful, messy, triumphant life, was the victory. They'd never gotten invited to anything again because I'd stopped waiting for their approval. I'd stopped needing them to see me. I'd started seeing myself. And once I'd done that, once I'd truly understood my own worth, their presence or absence had stopped mattering. They'd become irrelevant, and I'd become inevitable. That was the sweetest revenge of all.